Okay, welcome everyone to my rural development series. Today we'll be talking about the approaches to rural development and the necessity for rural development in Nigeria. All right, the expectation at the end of this session is that everyone listening to me should be able to identify and discuss different approaches to rural development, identify the problems of rural development in Nigeria, as well as discuss the necessity for rural development in Nigeria. Let's take a look at the different approaches to rural development. One, we have the reformist approach. Two, we have the structural approach, and we have the technological approach. Let's explain these approaches so that we can get a feel of what they are all about. Now, the reformist approach. In this approach, uh, in this approach to rural development, emphasis is given to behavioral changes of the rural farmers. So the changes in the behavior of the farmer, the approach is reformist, meaning that you're trying to bring about a change in the behavior of the people. So the approach seeks to change the farmer. All right. Now, in addition to that, efforts are made to find ways and means by which the farmer can play an important role in the rural development program and the projects through improvement in their attitude towards the program, improvement in their attitude generally to their community. So the reformist approach to rural development therefore emphasizes the participatory involvement of the farmer in reforming the rural area. The farmer is the target. The farmer are sensitized. They are sensitized, mobilized, they are engendered to specific ways to get actively involved in such a development process. So they will cajole, they encourage, they try to mobilize them to be part of the development process. The second approach, which is the technological approach, this approach emphasizes technological transformation of different aspects of the rural society, particularly agricultural production. This could just mean a shift from the local use of implements, farming implements, to the use of semi-modern or actual modern technology in farming. Okay, so technological approach to rural development is the emphasis or emphasizing of agricultural use of technology through its extension program uh, and so on. So you see the encouragement of transforming the rural area by the introduction of improved varieties, farm practices, seedlings, storage facilities, and so on and so forth. The third approach to rural development is the structural approach. The structural approach, the structural approach to rural development seeks to transform the existing economic, social, and political relationship in such a way that those who were previously disadvantaged find their position changed. The social, political, and economic relationship that needs to be changed include relationship between landlord and tenants, between poor peasants and farmers and money lenders, as well as between farmers and traditional rulers. Or we can also look at the relationship between poor peasants and middlemen that sell them things. So structural transformation of rural development or rural community is attained through what is known as agrarian reform, that's agricultural reform, most of which are concerned with land distribution as well as relationships. It should be noted that none of these three approaches is adequate in rural development when considered on its own. So basically, a meaningful rural development program must therefore consider all the three approaches as one package of a program. So in other words, what we really just mean is that rural development programs should recognize and put the three of them to use. Now let's highlight some of the problems of rural areas in Nigeria. Rural areas have this problem. One, vicious cycle of poverty, where poverty is just going in like a cyclical thing from one generation to another. The second is poor infrastructure. The road is bad, education is bad, the health system is bad, just generally infrastructure is just poor. Three, high population density. You have an average family giving birth to 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 15, some even more. Another problem of rural areas is high level of illiteracy. A lot of people can't read or write, and those that can read are barely literate enough to understand great intellectual things. We also have low social interaction and low politics. So you find out that in such rural areas, their participation in politics is really, really low. Then we have harmful traditional practices across different aspects of the African continent and Nigeria as well. There are practices that are harmful and antisocial. We also have lack of employment opportunities. When the economy is a mono economy, the opportunities are limited. When the economy is diversified, opportunities are highlighted. But in the rural areas, this is one of the problems: lack of employment opportunities. Okay. Now, what are the necessities for rural development? Why is it necessary that rural development should be engaged? Now, rural development, uh, according to scholars, there's a number of reasons why rural development is usually considered to be of overall necessity in a national context. One, the rural people consist of the vast majority of the Nigerian population. This is so despite the migration of people from rural to urban. At first glance, most people think that urban areas are more populated than rural areas. Considering urban areas in isolation, one city at a time, rural areas one community at a time, you may be right. But when we consider the urban areas together and the rural areas together, the population of the rural areas are more than the urban city. Come to think about it, how many urban cities do we have in comparison to the vastness of this country? So rural people consist of the vast majority of Nigerian population. So it is necessary that rural development is engaged. Number two, most of the food which Nigerians eat is produced by rural dwellers. That is why it's necessary that rural development is engaged. Number three, much of the country's agricultural needs for raw materials and subsequent industrial and economic growth is tied to the produce from the rural areas. That necessitates rural development. Another necessity that prompts rural development is that two of the five national objectives, as stated in the National Policy on Education, are tied to the rural area. One of them is a just and egalitarian society, and the second is a united, strong, and reliant nation. You can't be self-reliant if you can't produce your food. You can't be self-reliant if your technology is all imported. And most of these are hinged to rural areas. The fifth the fifth necessity for rural development in Nigeria is inequalities that exist in social and educational amenities between rural and urban areas. Because there's a lot of inequality between social and educational amenities in urban and rural areas, there is a need for rural development. There's also need for rural development because of inequalities that exist in the living standards among rural dwellers. We don't want to say between rural and urban. No, let's leave that. But between the rural dwellers, you will notice a lot of inequalities among them. So rural development should be introduced to help balance out these inequalities. Number seven, most rural dwellers live below poverty levels, which calls for urgent attention. Consequent upon these listed necessities or reasons why rural development is necessary, we must achieve self-reliance as a country. To achieve that, we must have an egalitarian or practice or have what is referred to as egalitarianism or full employment for all. And once we're able to achieve this, it is important that we note that we are now on the path to having rural development or having development in rural environments. It's also important to find out what sort of activities the rural dwellers engage in and identifying what factors impede the development of these areas. Once we identify these things correctly, solutions are easily profiled. So far, we've discussed the approaches to rural development. We've talked about the problems associated with rural areas in Nigeria. We also talked about the necessities for development of rural areas. Thank you very much for your time, as I look forward to seeing you in my next class.